Conservative delegates voted Saturday to add new social conservative policies to their party playbook. Two of those policies concern gender and trans issues. Nearly 70% of party delegates voted for a motion that states minors should be prohibited from gender-affirming care, or as the motion puts it, life-altering medicinal or surgical interventions. An even stronger majority, 86% of party delegates voted for a motion that demands single-sex spaces that are only open to women, such as prisons, shelters, locker rooms, and washrooms. That same motion defines a woman as a female person. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre is not bound to adopt any of the policies that were passed at the convention, but the convention's focus on these issues has disappointed one of the party's former candidates. Hannah Hodson made history in 2021 as the Conservative Party's first openly trans candidate, and she is here with me in studio. Hannah, good to see you. Thanks for coming in.
Nice for having me.
You said this weekend that the vote against gender-affirming care for minors could cost lives.
Yes.
What makes you say that?
Accessing gender-affirming care is already a minefield in this country. In Ontario, I was lucky and I only had to wait a year. Many clinics don't even have openings. And so further restricting that is going to further hurt the ability of trans teens and kids to access the care they need. And to be clear, a lot of people are focused around surgeries. That essentially doesn't happen in Canada. I'm sure someone could find a couple anecdotes, but surgeries don't happen on people under 18 in Canada. Gender-affirming care looks like social transition, it looks like puberty blockers.
Right, and so the party, the Conservative Party, which you ran for and
Yes.
were a member, and we'll get to that in just a second, they're drawing a distinction between people who are 18 and up and minors.
Yes.
What's wrong with drawing that line, in your view?
The line only exists if you accept that trans people are fundamentally are abnormal. The line only exists if you think that it's not a normal thing to be or an okay thing to be, because otherwise no one would be concerned. Because again, these serious medical interventions aren't happening on people who are under 18 in Canada. So the only restriction that people would want is if they don't see it as a valid way of living, because otherwise there would be no concern over people accessing gender-affirming care.
Right, so going back to my original question and the comment you made that this could cost lives,
Yes.
the care will become harder to get, and,
Yes.
and the surgeries that people talk about, you argue, are not happening in any
Significant,
way
yes.
in Canada. But going back to my question of how will this cost lives? What's the knock-on effect that you anticipate?
So as we've seen from study after study, the gender-affirming care drastically lowers the rates of suicidality, rates of other harms that happen to trans kids. And the best thing, a supportive parent and a supportive community is the best thing, and access to gender-affirming care, which, like I say, is often just puberty blockers or often just treating people like they want to be treated and using the names they want to be referred to.
Right, so you see it as if they can't get the care, it's suicide, it's self-harm,
Yes.
and it's these sort of destructive behaviors that will
Yes.
be as a consequence.
Trans youth have the high rates of suicide, homelessness, abuse, harassment, discrimination. All these things are significant in the trans community, specifically among youth.
You ran for this party in 2021, used to work for this party
Yes.
in the past. You're no longer a member of the party. Was it because of this, or did something else cause you to withdraw the membership?
There were many factors, of course, but the single biggest thing was when Mr. Poilievre refused to admonish or criticize what the New Brunswick government was doing, and now the Saskatchewan government and presumably the Ontario government, in restricting the rights of trans kids to experiment with their gender and figure out who they are and come into their own identity. And seeing that really was disappointing, and that was the single thing, the biggest thing that drove my leaving the party.
Mr. Poilievre's argument is that this is not his jurisdiction, it's provincial, and this is an issue for parents, and we're seeing the traction of this parental rights, on this particular issue as it pertains to youth in New Brunswick and Saskatchewan, as we've seen it. What do you make of that, and what message do you have for premiers and politicians who support that particular movement?
Well, I think it's funny that we're talking about parental rights, because they'll say, well, parental rights, but at the same moment they'll revoke the ability of supportive parents to go with their children on a gender-affirming care journey. So they'll say parental rights for me, but not for thee. And I think that it's a serious problem, because of course we want parents included and supportive in their child's education. No one doesn't want that. But if a child doesn't feel safe telling their parent what is going on there, and is that child in danger? And in many cases, yes. And That's the scary part about these kind of policies.
On the specific policies that were adopted by the Conservatives this weekend,
Yes.
Pierre Poilievre was asked in advance of this how he felt about these specific policies. And he made the point that, look, I don't want to prejudge and influence the debate and the votes before they happen, but I, as leader, am not bound by these. These aren't automatically party policy. I'll look at them and consider them. Do you take comfort in that as a party you ran for, that the leader would say, just because this is what the grassroots at the convention wants, it doesn't mean it's going to become official party policy, or is he dodging it? What's your take there?
Well, I will say I suspect that I take him as word that housing is a bigger priority if he were to form government. But the reality is that political parties love to say this, oh, I'm not bound by things at convention, and then criticize the other side for things that are passed at convention. The Conservatives will point to the Liberals and say, oh, well, this is terrible. And they don't let the Prime Minister off the hook, or the Liberals don't let the Conservatives off the hook. The reality is that when members decide who travel across the country, who are devoted enough to the party to make that trip and make their voice clear, I think it's a little ridiculous to claim that, oh, this has no influence on me. This has nothing to do with the will of the party or ultimately what policies we will pass.
But you ran for this party in 2021. So is it possible this is just the cohort of the truly motivated who went here and did this? I mean, how different is this from the party you ran for in the last federal election?
Unfortunately, significantly, from what I can tell. I mean, I will say that in the previous election, big reason I ran was because I felt gains were being made in areas like LGBTQ rights and other areas like, areas like climate. Gains are being made. And I would love nothing more than to support and talk about issues like housing and affordability. But when human rights are at risk, can't compromise. And human rights are something we can't compromise, and I'm fighting for that here.
You've spoken out against this, not just here, but in other forums, and I assume, or I know, there's been some backlash for that. I mean, how are you doing personally in all of this?
It can be difficult. In the last few days, I've been called several things that were not appropriate to say on the CBC. I have a platform, and I have a 36-year-old, white, professional who has a platform. Most trans people in Canada don't have that platform. So I feel it's my responsibility to speak up and fight for the people that have no voice. And the hate is tough, the blowback is difficult, but it's worth it.
You have a platform, you have a voice. Do you have a political home? I mean, you ran for one of the two main national parties just a few years ago. I mean, where are you on the political scale right now?
I think it's a very big challenge. Frankly, I think that as one looks around the country, areas like housing and affordability are significant challenges. And I frankly agree with Mr. Poilievre on some of these issues. But this is disqualifying for me. To tell you the truth, I don't know. If there was an election tomorrow, I don't know what I'm going to do. I would probably vote based on local candidate, which I know is more people say than mean. I'm not sure what else I can do.